What's up guys, welcome back to another video. This video is going to be very different. As you can see, we have a tier maker video here where we're going to rate all the bench press variations that I think are useful for increasing your powerlifting bench press, your post bench press. So these are all different types of variations, and we're going to start up right now with the overall best one, regular competition standard bench press. Regular bench press where you don't do anything usual. You have your regular grip, feet is planted, and you have a regular ass pause on the chest. This is obviously going to be number one since it's the most specific, and this is probably overall what you need to do the most in almost all circumstances. Now let's head into some variations. And the first one we have here is the long pause bench press. And we're going to follow that up with the tempo bench press because these are fairly similar. So I kind of use these as a primer oftentimes to your regular bench press, since it's a load limiting variation where you're going to use less weight. It's not going to be as fatiguing as it could be on a regular bench press. And we're still going to practice a very, very specific movement pattern. We're not changing anything of the angles for the chest, shoulders, and triceps here. So I'm going to put both of these actually into the super mega epic, and now we have probably the three best bench press variations you can have right here. Now, one thing that's important to mention is I would probably almost never use both of these in the same program at once, since they kind of do a lot of the same things, and sometimes a tempo bench press will actually also be a long pause. But it's very, very rare that I don't have one of these two variations in a regular program. They're going to be super beneficial to almost any type of bench press. If you're wide grip, if you're close grip, if you're very high arch, if you're very low arch, almost always a tempo or a long pause is going to be very useful. Now next up, what we have here is a bit more of a controversial one. This is the touch and go bench press. This picture is referring to Larry Reel's 300 something kg touch and go bench press that he did a few years ago. And I'm going to put this into almost never actually. It can be useful in a very, very few cases, but it's not something that I would ever program really unless it's a very specific situation. The reason being, this is actually a variation where you're going to use more weight than the regular competition standard bench press, and you're going to eliminate the hardest portion of the lift. You're not even going to train the bottom portion where all of your muscles are stretched out the most, which also seems to be the most hypertrophic. So you are probably getting less hypertrophy. You're probably getting more weight equals you're going to get more stress and fatigue up, like potentially. And you're not going to train the hardest portion of the lift for what it's going to be for most people. So this is overall a very bad variation to use, I would say. Now it's important to mention, I think there's a very, very big difference between a touch and go bench press and a very, very short pause bench press. Because in a very, very short pause bench press, that means you're coming down to the bench and you're having the bar do a full dead stop for just a second or two. And that's going to make a huge difference because you're going to be very load limited by that. So the load is going to be way down compared to a touch and go where you can bounce and all that kind of stuff. And it's going to be way more specific, and there isn't actually that big of a difference between a very short pause and a long pause compared to what there is to a touch and go to a short pause. Now next up, what we have is a close grip bench press, and we have Julius Maddox here doing a close grip, and we're going to put that into very useful. The close grip bench press is overall one of the best variations since it is, again, load limiting but range of motion increasing. So this is typically a way to get in hypertrophy in a very specific bench press movement pattern, and also just to gain strength in this. Like if you're increasing your close grip bench press by 20 kg, chances are your regular bench press is probably also going to increase. Now next up, what we have here is the wide grip bench press, and unlike the close grip bench press, the wide grip bench press is going to come down all the way to very situational. The reason for that being, it's not very specific to your regular competition standard bench press, and it's not even giving you more range of motion or hypertrophy potential than just like the close grip bench press is. So it's probably a worse hypertrophy builder in a less specific movement pattern to the regular bench press. So that's the primary reason why it's not that good. oftentimes people are also going to have issues with their shoulders or their elbows or their wrist with this, and it's overall not really a enjoyable exercise for a lot of people to do. Now next up, what we have is the chained bench press slash banded bench press here, and we're going to put this into the overall good. So the reason it's not that much higher or lower here is because it can be useful for overloading and getting in some very specific movement pattern bench press, and it can be a little bit load limiting actually, especially in the bottom portion of the lift where you're not going to use as much weight. It's not going to be as heavy down there as it could be for a regular bench press. So it can help there and to overload a bit of the top, and can be useful in some cases. The thing is just oftentimes for most people, again, the hardest part should be right off the chest, especially if you're a relatively wide grip slash a little bit of high arch bench presser. This variation is probably not going to be as useful as if you're just a close grip, not as high bench presser. Now next up here is Larsen press slash feet up bench. I decided to put these into the same, even though they're not the same exercise. They're very close. The difference is just that we're going to have the feet all the way out or the feet on the bench when doing the exercise. Typically speaking, a feet up bench press is a little bit more of an extreme Larsen press, so the range of motion is going to be a little bit longer. We're not going to be able to arch as much with the feet up bench, and for some people it can help to relieve some stress on the lower back by doing that. So we're going to put the Larsen press slash feet up bench up to very useful. And the reason it's not going to come higher up is oftentimes putting in some leg drive is not going to be a bad way to bench press, especially if you're like benching under 2 plates. If you're benching less than 2 plates, then you don't really need that much of a higher stimulus to fatigue ratio in the bench press, which is what you could assume this variation would give you, because you're not really that strong and you're not generating that much fatigue anyways, so your stimulus to fatigue ratio probably should be really good anyways. Unless you're like a female in a lighter weight class, obviously that's going to depend, and it is going to depend on your body weight anyways. But if you don't have that good of a bench press, I would not really recommend this exercise at all actually. But to all other people that are just like mid-strength and above, this is a very, very good variation. And there are definitely some cases where I would say a less than like 100 kg bencher can definitely still use this, especially if you're lighter or just want to get in some more bench volume without too much fatigue. Now next up, what we have here is the pin press. So I'm going to put the pin press into very situational, but it can be into overall good depending on how you do it. So the pin press is oftentimes going to be range of motion limited because you're going to put the pins slightly above the chest. And it's going to be a bit different compared to how you do it. If you do it with a full dead stop on the pins, let them come down and rest there, it's going to be a bit of a different exercise almost than if you come down to the pins and just push all the way back up again immediately. Now the bench press can be a overloading exercise where we are not going to be load limited at all. We're going to be able to use a lot more weight than the regular bench press, and that can have some good things in it just by that. That can be positive in some cases, but oftentimes we don't actually need that much of like overload in the bench press. More so in the squat could that be useful. And oftentimes it's just not that good of a variation. We don't need to have really, really heavy weights in our hands unless you're an equipped bencher. Now lastly here, this is the Spoto bench press. So in this you're going to come down with the bar and you're going to pause the bench press, but you're not going to let the bar touch the chest. It's going to be paused right above the chest, a few centimeters above it. I've also called this the toilet press previously, where you like have a very soft thing like a toilet roll or a sponge or anything like that, where you're going to come down and there's not going to be any weight on it, but you can just use that to like make sure the range of motion is going to be the exact same every single time. And you're basically just going to hold all of the weight in your hands while doing this, and this is a really, really good way to practice a good soft touch pause where you're not letting the bar rest on your chest in the pause in a regular bench press. So this is probably the best variation to learn that, and simply just for that only reason I'm going to put it into very useful. So this is how you're gonna learn if you don't know already. If you're switching from touch and go bench to pause bench, or if you don't really know how to do a soft touch bench, then this variation is probably gonna be the number one way to go to learn that.